It's my honor to be here with you. As she said, I have 2 bachelor's degrees in theology and a master's in clinical psychology. She actually confused me there for a second. So I've had the incredible privilege also of being mentored by a pastor with his rabbi training for the last 14, 15 years. He's on the National Executive of the Assemblies of God in America, but he just happens to have his rabbi training as well. And so we get together on a regular basis and study and been mentored by him. So all my stuff sort of comes from that bent. The master's degree in clinical psychology just means I'm qualified to sort your head out should you need, all right? So on your way out, and as you're walking around and, just experiencing what the conference has with morning tea and everything, we have a gigantic resource table out there. If you can't find my resource table, seek medical help. It's huge, right? You can come on back out there. Everything's available in 4 formats: CD, DVD, USB, and direct download. Okay, so if you don't know what a USB is, just get the CD, all right? Or you can ask a 9-year-old what to do with the USB. They'll be okay with it, all right? So the reason, if you look at that, you say, why do you carry all that stuff around? The reason we do is because we make a heaping pile loaded money from it, right? The reason we do that is because we believe that we're not just simply called to go to heaven when we die, that we're called to be a part of partnering with Jesus to bring heaven to every place we see, hell here. And so the way I run my business, because this is my first time here, you wouldn't know this. The way I run my business is I run everything on honorariums and love offerings. And so my salary, office expenses, airplanes, all kinds of stuff, it comes out of honorariums and love offerings and people who are just generous with us on a regular basis. But 100% of the profit from the table goes to our main mission in the world, which is to take care of the poor and the afflicted. And so we have 3 orphanages in China that take care of mentally handicapped children, 2 in Henyang, 1 in Changsha. We also have a ministry in Cape Town that's officially recognized by the Department of Justice in Cape Town as a viable option to Pollsmoor Prison. And so we have 2 sides to that. We have a side that gets gang members and criminals and stuff out of the justice system and into education and job training. And that runs itself because we own businesses and we make them work it. But the part that doesn't is the prostitution side. And so the district attorney in Cape Town has said, listen, we want you to take on these women as well. And so we've started that side as well. So this time of year, the profit from that goes to Cape Town to help us get these girls out of sex trafficking. Just to give you an idea of the power of that table, in the month of May, we were able to give $57,000 US to our orphanages in China. And when you do that in Chinese money, that's huge. And so all I'm asking you to do is while you're enjoying each other and getting morning tea and things like that, if you would come out and let me put something in your hands that'll change the way you look at God forever. In so doing, you put something in our hands that helps us continue to get girls off the street. I think it's a pretty good deal. All right? All right. I want to talk to you this morning. This is my first time here, so I thought, what can I do? You got to organize your talks, right? And I always want to move people. There's sometimes you preach because you have to. It's time to preach. Sometimes you preach because you actually have something to say. And so I actually have something to say. And what I want us to do is I want us to journey in conference together in something that fits together well. This time of year makes it very easy. Last night was Yom Kippur. If you don't know what that is, you will. And we're going to talk about that and how important that is and what it means to be a follower of Jesus. Today, I want to talk to you about the Bible. I want to talk to you about Pentecost. I want to talk to you about what it means to be a Pentecostal person, and that's what we would call ourselves, and how sometimes we've missed the boat with that, what it means to be in a relationship with God, and how it affects how we read the whole Bible. I know it sounds like a lot, but trust me, it'll all fit together well. See, you can't really read the Bible without understanding that the whole thing is a wedding proposal. The whole Bible is a wedding proposal about God's attempts to woo people into a more intimate relationship. The historian Karen Armstrong says that the one thing that sets the God of the Christians and the Jews apart from all other gods in the world is that he wants relationship. He wants something different than high and mighty and then judgment and all of this. And she actually says the one thing that sets him apart from all the other religions in the world is that he's kind. And that if Christians and Jews ever make their God not kind, then he'll lose his distinctive, because that's the one thing that sets him apart. She actually says that the book of Leviticus was the kindest book about God ever written at the time, because it was the first book in any civilization of any culture anywhere in the world that put limits on sacrifice. Up until then, they didn't know how much to cut. They didn't know how much to burn. They didn't know anything. Leviticus comes along and says, just do this and know you're okay with God. So for us, what seems violent and horrible was actually the most gracious book about God ever written. written. Why? Because the Bible's not some sort of static record of what God is. The Bible's a dynamic, progressive revelation of what people thought God was at the time it was written. That was such a giant leap forward to the final revelation of God in the risen Christ, that God chose to give it life by breathing his own breath into it. And he gives the Bible life, and that's called inspiration. It's called getting life inside. And so it was all about God wanting to marry. As a matter of fact, at the end of the Bible, the whole thing ends with something called the marriage supper of the Lamb. So the whole thing is about that. And I want to do is I want to show you this in the book of Exodus. The book of Exodus is one big giant marriage proposal. And to not understand that, you will miss the point of Exodus. It's about God wooing a group of slaves into a relationship with him. Now, I want to talk about this by showing you there was 5 steps in a Hebrew relationship. So there's 5 steps in a Hebrew relationship that led to marriage. These are the 5 steps. If you guys could bring those slides up so you can learn the words. The 5 steps are called lakah, segula, mikvah, ketubah, and chuppah. All right? Lakah, segula, mikvah, ketubah, and chuppah. Now, social scientists tell me that you're going to forget 96% of everything I say by Monday, and that's very depressing because I've worked very hard on this. But they say that you can remember more if I get you to repeat some things. So I want us to put those words back up, and I want us to learn these words with some go-dubbo gusto, okay? All right? All right, so everybody try this. The word sounds like this. Lakah, go. Lakah. Very good. Let's try this one. Segula. Right, let's try this one. Mikvah. And then ketubah. And then chuppah. You can even try it this way. Chuppah, yiba, yiba. And by the way, that is what you're thinking, all right? Lakah, segula, mikvah, ketubah, and chuppah. Now, I'm going to do this 2 ways, one in the natural and the other in the spiritual, to try to get us a fuller picture of what's going on here. If I was dating somebody, and let's say I was dating somebody back then, but let's just put it in today's language. If I was dating somebody, and that dating relationship got to that point where there's chemistry and there's compatibility, and you just really like them, and you start wondering, is this going to go to the next place? At some point, you got to have that awkward conversation of, where is this going? And no one likes that conversation because it's so awkward, especially if you're the first one to ever say, I love you. If you say, I love you, and they say, I know, that's just weird, right? Whoever says, I love you first is taking all the risk. And so what happens is in those situations is if I was dating somebody, what that girl would be longing for me to say to her would be lakah. In this situation, it'd be like it was the initiation, the inauguration of the entire marriage process. So let's say we were on a date, and the date just went really, really, really well, and we had just a really good time and a really good conversation, and I think, you know what, tonight's the night I should probably do this. And so I take her home, and I walk her to her door, and I take her by the hand, and I say, listen, sweetie, lakah. Well, she would have a hard time keeping her hands off, right? Because honestly, I mean, if you sleep in and drink Coke, you too can have a body like this, right? And so she tries to contain herself, and she's like, oh. So she goes in, and she's like, oh my goodness. She calls her 3 best friends. She's like, he said lakah to me. He said lakah to me. Oh, yeah. He said lakah to me. Facebook status change. He said lakah. That would be in today's world. Lakah means my own. I want to make you my own. I want you and me. I want you to belong to me. It's the inauguration of a Hebrew wedding. Now, this was in place in their culture, but you see this in the book of Exodus when God chooses to get these slaves out of Egypt and into the promised land. And here's what he says to them. Check this. It says, and I will free you from being slaves to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment, and I will take you as my own. The word is lakah. Laka. Now, you didn't have to explain to them this is the inauguration of a wedding. They lived in that culture. This is for us to go back and look at. And the important thing about this is if we ever see Jesus in one facet, we cheapen him. So sometimes we think of Jesus as the forgiver. Right? Jesus is my forgiver, right? Jesus is my forgiver. And is he? Yes. And do we celebrate that? Yes. Sometimes we say Jesus is my Savior. And do we celebrate that? Yes. And do we honor that? Yes. But if we ever get stuck in Jesus just being that, and we miss the side of it that Jesus doesn't just want to forgive you, he wants to set you free from slavery here, now, today. And then he doesn't want to just set you free from slavery. He wants to walk with you every day. That is 3 levels removed from just a nice God that forgives us. A nice God that forgives us is one thing, but a God that's interested in the things causing us pain and wanting us to be set free from it, that's a whole nother thing. And then not only a forgiver, but a guy that sets us free, but also someone that wants to do life with us every single day. That is a whole nother thing. What you see in the scriptures is not simply a forgiver. What you see is a liberator who wants to then do life with you. I have seen the misery of my people in Egypt, and I've heard them crying out for their slave drivers, and I'm going to come down and rescue them. What you see in Exodus is somebody or something is doing something to you, and God is not pleased, and he is determined to set you free. In other words, he doesn't just want to forgive you for the outburst of anger. He wants to set you free from the hold anger has on you here, now, today. He doesn't want to forgive you for the moment of lust. He wants to set you free from lust ruining your life here, now, today. Listen, let me just say it this way. If heaven and hell were not the issue, is Jesus still worth following? Like, let me say it this way. If you could go to heaven without Jesus, would you still follow Jesus? Like, if God comes down and says, you know what, the whole heaven and hell thing, no, listen, you can go you're going to go to heaven whether you trust Jesus or not. If that happened, it's not, but if that happened, would you still go, you know what, even if I go to heaven without Jesus, I'll still follow Jesus? If heaven and hell wasn't the issue, is Jesus still worth following? And I hope the answer is a resounding yes. Why? Because if the only reason you're following Jesus is to stay out of hell, that is very degrading to Jesus. Like if Jesus said, why are you following me? And your only answer is, well, I'd hate to go to hell when I died. That is very degrading. That would be like your wife asking you, why'd you marry me? And your only answer is, well, the other chick was ugly. Right? That doesn't even, like option B is just shocking, right? If Jesus asked you, why are you following me? Your answer should be, I'm following you because I love you and I want to respond to your love for me by partnering with you to do whatever it is you want to do on this earth, namely bring your kingdom here. See, Jesus isn't just a forgiver. He isn't just a savior. He's also a liberator. He's also a guy that wants intimacy. So la ka. Now let's go back to the natural. So I'm with Susie or whoever my imaginary girlfriend is here, and I've said la ka. Now, once I've said la ka, what word would she be longing to hear me say? Everybody, segula, right? Ready? Let's try that again. Segula. See, you already forgotten it once, right? Let's try that again. Segula. Segula is sort of like la ka times 2. It's a whole thing. So we're on a date, and it goes well, and I take her home, and I hold her by the hands, and I say, Susie, segula. Well, she can barely contain herself. She runs in, she calls her 3 best friends. He said segula. Oh, yeah, he said segula. Facebook change, he said segula. Now, segula means treasured possession or special treasure. It's I don't want you just to be mine. I want you to be the most important person in my whole life. You can see the same group of people that he said la ka to. This happens in Exodus 19. Check this. One more. There you go. Exodus 19, verse 5. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, the word keep there, by the way, does not mean to be perfect about it. It means to protect it. It just means, by the way, the place in an ancient castle that you would make your last stand is called the keep. Yep. So in 1 John and places like that, when it says keep the commands, when he says no one obeys all the commands, but you better keep the commands, he's not contradicting himself. He's just simply saying protect it. It would be like having a goalkeeper, a goalie. Like don't let anything violate God's command to love was the context there. Anyway, now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. The word is segula. Segula. Once again, laka, then segula. The basic feeling for the Israelites at this point would have been, does God want to marry us? Like, we've got issues. We've known nothing but slavery for 430 years. When he starts making national law, he's going to have to tell us obvious things like, don't have sex with your mother, right? That's in Leviticus, by the way. When you read things like that, you got to be thinking, was that really a problem? Or do you have to really tell people, hey, don't set people on fire, okie dokie? And I mean, like, honestly, like, right? These people don't even know how to be human, yet God wants to marry them. Laka and segula. Now, once you say laka and once you say segula, the next word the girl would be longing to hear would be mikvah. Mikvah. Now, what would be going on now is her 4 friends would be going, has he said mikvah yet? Does he have commitment issues? Has he said mikvah yet? He said segula what? I mean, how long before segula wears off, right? Like, it's been 6 weeks. He said segula, where's the mikvah? It would be something like that. Now, when I've preached this at women's conferences and stuff, anytime I talk about this in a Hebrew wedding, I talk about laka. And I did this huge women's conference up in Budrum, and when I said laka, the whole room was like, oh. Yeah. Then you go segula and talk about being a special treasure, and the whole room's like, Now, mikvah is far less romantic. Mikvah means go wash. Girl, you need a bath. Your breath is stinky. No. Mikvah, in today's world, there's all this mystery surrounding when someone's going to ask someone to marry them. And so once it gets to that point and you've talked about it, your friends would be like, is tonight the night? He made reservations where? I bet tonight's the night, right? And so there's all this mystery. Of course, when you get your hopes built up like that and then it's just a nice pizza, it's like, well, tonight wasn't the night. But in their world, there was no mystery as to when you were going to be asked to be married. Mikvah was a 3-day notice that in 3 days, I'm going to ask you to marry me. Okay? And the idea was that I want you to be clean. Go wash. Because I want you to be clean when I ask you to marry me. And for the obvious pragmatic reason is that if you're not ceremonially clean, then I can't touch you. And I'd love to be able to touch you on the day I ask you to marry me. It just would be, it's a serious sort of thing. You see this in the Bible lots of places. The one place you see it with overkill is in the book of Esther, when it says that Esther bathed in a mikvah for a year before she approached her husband, which I think we could, in perfume, which I think we could all agree is a bit overkill. Like if someone had bathed for a year in perfume and walked in here, we'd be like, whoo, girl, you overdid that one. That's like, whoo, man, what are you hiding, right? So that sort of idea, right? But mikvah was, I want you to be ceremonially clean. In 3 days, in 3 days' time, I'm going to ask you to marry me. I'm going to ask you to marry me. Now, once again, Exodus chapter 6, I want to laka. Exodus chapter 19, verse 5, out of all the world, I want you to be my segula. Exodus 19, verse 10. This is just 5 verses later. Check this. And the Lord said to Moses, go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow and have them wash their clothes and be ready by the 3rd day. Mikvah. Once again, the general feeling would have been, does God want to marry us? Is God wanting to marry us? Now, just to test your Bible knowledge, because it's Thursday morning and you're in church, I assume you know your Bible fairly well. What happens 3 days after Exodus 19, verse 10? It's something that we call the 10 Commandments, Exodus 20, the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments, by the way, if you look at the 10 Commandments, the word command is never in there. It's something that was put in there. It's something we put in there later. As a matter of fact, in Jewish cultures, it's not called 10 Commandments. It's called a 10-word Ketubah. It was a 10-statement marriage proposal. This was not. It's okay to call it 10 Commandments. That's fine, as long as we understand that it's not 10 conditions for God to love us. It's 10 proofs He already does. It's wait a minute. You don't even know how to be human, and so a ketubah was. Let me explain it the natural, and then we'll go into the spiritual. A ketubah was a marriage proposal. It was a prenup, actually, is a better way to say it. They did not get married in those days without contracts that spilled out how we were going to treat one another. And those contracts became the basis of something called a covenant, right? And so essentially, if I could do it as simply as possible, me and this imaginary girlfriend, we would sit down and we would have two witnesses, more often than not our fathers. And so the witnesses were there for two reasons, for witness and wisdom, right? Because when you're getting married at 14 years old, you don't have a clue, right? And so there might be some things that you think are possible, but somebody that's a bit wiser is going, that's not actually going to happen, right? And so they were there for wisdom and they were there for witness, those two things. And you would write a ketubah. A ketubah was a written marriage contract. It was a basic agreement about how we're going to treat one another in our marriage. And I could put anything in the ketubah I wanted, and she could put anything in the ketubah she wanted, so long as we both agreed. Because how can two walk together lest they be agreed? And so I could put anything in there I wanted, she could put anything in there she wanted, and nothing was off limits. How we're speaking to one another, sexual behavior, all of this would have been put in writing. This is how we're going to treat one another. And then after we're married, if either one of us decides to break the ketubah or to unrepentantly dishonor what we had agreed to, they had a word for that. It was called marital unfaithfulness. Marital unfaithfulness was not just cheating. Marital unfaithfulness was when either person in an unrepentant pattern broke their side of the basic agreement. And so what would happen is I would write anything in the ketubah I wanted. She would write anything in the ketubah she wanted. We're being advised by the wisdom of our fathers. And then once it was all done, I would stand and face her and I would say, will you marry me? Right? Which is based on what we just wrote. Will you enter into this sort of relationship with me? And she would at this point, of course, say, yes. I mean, you very rarely ever see someone at the altar going, I don't think so, right? You know, the priest goes, do you? Yeah, no, right? No, you don't do that, right? Because you've worked all that out beforehand. And so she would say yes. Now watch this language. I would then, when she said yes, I would then say this. I go to prepare a place for you, that where I am, there you may be also. Then she would say, well, when are you going to come back to receive me unto yourself? And I would say, I do not know the day or the hour. But when my Father approves the wedding chamber I'm building for you, I'll come back to receive you unto myself. So be ready. Where have you heard that language before, right? So when Jesus is using that language, the general vibe would be, that's wedding talk. This is intimate relationship wedding talk. I would then go away. I would build a wedding chamber, which was nothing more than an extra bedroom on my father's existing house, okay? I've seen these compounds. It's unbelievable how they lived back then. The world's getting better. So it was an extra bedroom on my father's existing house. And then I would come back to receive her unto myself. I'd come back, and then we would go have a wedding. At the wedding would be something called a chuppah. Now, at a wedding, there were two chuppahs. Let me show you a chuppah. This is a talit. It's a prayer shawl. It is a microcosm of the veil that separates the holy place from the Holy of Holies. It's sort of like, since no one could ever see the veil that separated the holy place from the Holy of Holies, they made these little scale models so you could wear it. It's sort of like, how many of us guys would love to drive a Ferrari? All of us. How many of us will ever afford one? Never. So what we do is buy little model ones. It makes us feel better. Now, it's sort of like that. And so the idea of the talit was this was what holds the presence of God. And so there's a whole nother message in how they would how they would wear it. Yeah, that moves. Yeah, and there was this whole nother message in how they would wear it, and the idea was that you can't organize your life where God is here but not there. God is here with you everywhere. Is that sort of, anyway, another message. Anyway, so what they would do is they would take one of these things, and they would take the 4 tassels, as you could see, and they would wrap it around these sticks. And when they wrapped it around the sticks, it would make a canopy. It would make this canopy over the top of their, it was a marriage altar. And so there was 2 marriage altars. One was at the wedding, and so you would come and you would stand under the huppah, or the idea is under the presence of God. And you would stand under the huppah and you would do your wedding, and you do salt sprinklings and all kinds of things that we won't get into for time's sake. And then once the wedding was over, there was a second huppah. And the second huppah was draped out over the bed in the marriage chamber that you built. And so what would happen is when the wedding was over, you would then take your bride, and you would, like, there was this procession of the bride to the door of the marriage chamber. And at that point, the groom would then pick his bride up. I don't know if you do that. Do you do that in Australia, where you carry, you pick them up and carry them under the, right? It's a good idea for some. Others, I wouldn't recommend it. But like it's like, girl, I can give you a piggyback. Just hop on in here. But anyway, nonetheless. And so the guy would pick his bride up. And oh, by the way, the word to pick your bride up is where we get the word rapture from. It just means to snatch your bride up. It's a wedding talk. It's not scary. It's a wedding sort of thing. It's not destruction. It's happy. It's a wedding talk. Then you'd go in. This is where it gets extremely weird for Western culture. You'd go into the wedding chamber, and they would shut the door behind you. And then of course the huppah was over the top of the bed, and you would consummate your marriage under the presence of God. The idea was that God is the witness of this act, because let's be honest, it's just not a great spectator sport for anybody else, right? So God is the witness of this act. But this is where it gets weird. Like, you'd pick her up, and then you'd walk into the wedding chamber, and there'd be a huppah there, and then you'd consummate your marriage underneath the huppah, and they just waited outside for you to be done, which was just odd, really, because the party can't start till you're back out. So they're like, right? And these are small places, and you're in there, consummating your marriage underneath the huppah. So you go in there and you do that, and I don't know, 17 seconds later, you're like, here we go. And, remember, they're 14, right? So they, and then you'd come out, and the party would start. That's the Hebrew. That was the basic Hebrew wedding. But wait a minute, lakah, segula, mikvah. Here comes God's ketubah. Let me read you the first line of his marriage contract. Check this. Oh, no, back up, sorry. Yeah, there we go. And God, this is the marriage contract, ketubah. And God spoke all these words, saying this, I am the Lord your God. I want you to notice that his marriage contract starts out with an affirmation of truth, not a condition of it. Hey, I love you. No matter what you do, I love you. I am the Lord your God. And let me show it to you this in Hebrew. In the bottom there, I am the Lord your God only has 3 words. Anoki Jehovah Elohim. Anoki Jehovah Elohim. Now, if you know anything about Hebrew, you can say, I am the Lord your God with 2 words. Jehovah Elohim. But there's this unnecessary word, Anoki. And it happens to be the first word of the Ketubah. Now, if an unnecessary word happens to be the first word of the Ketubah, might it be important? Now, if you could hit that next slide for me. The word Anoki has 4 letters in Hebrew, A-N-C-H-M-Y. The O really isn't there. It just helps us pronounce it, okay? Now, in ancient Hebrew writing, every Hebrew letter was a picture. So every Hebrew word was a comic strip, right? So it's like, because they learned to write in hieroglyphics, because they came from Egypt. Just makes sense. Now, the pictures on the pictures of this, the A is an ox head going into a yoke. It means the ability to carry something. The N are fish multiplying, like 1 becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8. It looks like a musical crescendo. The CH is a hedge or a fence. And the Y is an upraised hand. It means to praise or submit. So you have an ox head going into a yoke. You have fish multiplying. You have a hedge or a fence. And then you have an upraised hand. So when the Hebrew people saw the first word of the 10 Commandments or the Ketubah or the 10-word Ketubah, here's what they read. Next slide. Your authority is multiplying inside the hedge of praise and submission. In other words, the commitment God makes from line 1 of the 10 Commandments is, I am here to make you bigger. Your life is fixing to get better. It's not, if you don't do this, I'll destroy you. Any message that says, if you don't do this, God will destroy you, that is not the kingdoms of this Christ. It doesn't matter if there's a 25-foot cross over the building. That is not what God's been about. From the beginning, God has been about, I am here to make you bigger. If you choose to live this way, your life will get better. Essentially, it's, you've done nothing but slavery for 430 years? I want to teach you how to be human. And if you think about the 10 Commandments as a marriage proposal, it just makes it so much better. Like, hey, don't have any other gods before me. In other words, if you remember, I'm the one that got you out of slavery. So, and if we're going to be together, I'd like to be the only one, if that's okay. That's one. 2, don't have idols. In other words, if we're going to be married, I'd love for you to throw your pictures of your old boyfriends away. That would be awesome. 3, remember the Sabbath day. Keep it. In other words, if we're going to be married, can we have one day in 7 that's like just us? Because that would be awesome. And by the way, you've only known slavery for 430 years. That means none of you have had a day off ever. So what we're going to do is we're going to make it national law that everyone has to have a day off because you're not a machine, you're a human being. That is grace, not law, right? Don't use my name in vain, which by the way is not a language issue. The word there is nasa, which means to carry. In other words, it has nothing to do with saying something like to say Jesus Christ or something like that. It's distasteful and we shouldn't do it. But nonetheless, it has nothing to do with taking God's name in vain. The word is don't carry his name. Literally in the root words it says, don't carry his name in a way that disappoints the hope that rests upon it. In other words, don't, let me just say it this way. Don't sign, if we're going to be married, you're going to have power of attorney. Don't sign checks I wouldn't sign when I'm out of town. That would just be awesome. Let's get real practical. Don't put the fish on your car and then point your finger at the sky when someone cuts you off in traffic. Don't do that. Don't put the cross around your neck and then curse out the girl at Woolworths when she's taking too long to check you out at a store that prepackages food for you. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't wear the WWJD bracelet or something and then curse out the girl at KFC when she messes up your order. Right? Don't come home from church and then insult the intelligence of your husband because he left his underwear on the floor for the 18,000th time. Take a second and realize that man would gladly die for you if an intruder came in tonight. And so don't insult the intelligence of someone who would die for you if an intruder came in over a pair of underwear. Just pick up the underwear. It's okay. And you guys pick up your underwear, honestly, and light a match every now and then. You're disgusting. It's that. Yes. Yeah. Don't tie yourself to Jesus and then get really, really mad at your wife if she falls asleep too early for your liking. Don't do that. She's a good lady who's tired, right? So it's this. Essentially, it's when you tie yourself to Jesus, there's a hope in that name. Don't carry your life in such a way that discipline. In other words, there's a way that you could never swear with your tongue, but you're swearing with your whole life. Yeah, don't do that. And I want you to think about it. If you've known nothing but slavery for 430 years and the word comes down, don't kill one another. What? Really? In our new world, the strong can't kill the weak just because they want to? It's amazing. Don't steal. Really? In our new world, the strong can't just take from us whatever they want? That is awesome. Don't commit adultery. What? You mean in our new world, the strong people can't come take our wives? Our wives are protected? Are you kidding me? How nice is this God? Your authority is going to multiply inside the hedge of praise and submission. You've known nothing but slavery. Welcome to being human again. Laka, Segula, Mikvah, Ketubah. And then, of course, it always ends with Huppah. The next verse after the 10 Commandments ends is this. Check this. This is the Huppah. When the people saw the thunder and the lightning, and they heard the trumpet, and they saw the mountain in smoke. The idea of being covered in smoke, that was Huppah. they trembled with fear. When the people saw the thunder and the lightning, and they saw the mountain and smoke, and they heard the sound of a trumpet, they trembled in fear. This is a very weird verse, because look, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to. All right. When the people saw, so it says they see thunder, lightning, and smoke, and they hear trumpets. That's weird. It should say they saw lightning and smoke and heard trumpets and thunder, right? How do you see thunder? But he doesn't say that. He says they saw thunder, they saw lightning, and they heard the trumpet, and then they saw smoke. Well, how do you see thunder? It's interesting. If you look this up in the original language, the word thunder is the word kole. Kole, everywhere else in the Bible, is translated voices or languages. It's the same word Moses used when he said, I saw the voice, kole, out of the burning bush. Same word is used here. So at the base of the mountain, I want you to see this. They're standing there, and the whole thing covers them in smoke. And they look up, and they see languages or voices. They see voices inside lightning. The word lightning there is the same word for glorified fire that Moses used with the burning bush. I saw the voice coming out of the fire. Same two words. He could have, I don't know why they translated it that way. They could have easily just translated it. And we saw the voices out of the fires. We saw the voices out of the fires, and we heard the sound of a trumpet, and it was, so here's what happened. After the Ketubah was given, they're standing there, and they look up, and the whole presence of God covers them in smoke, and they hear the sound of a trumpet, and they see languages inside fire. What would the languages have been saying? Will you marry me? The Talmud says that on this day in history, God proposed to all of creation by using 70,000 tongues of fire. In other words, evidently the tongues of fire went as far as they could see, and they assumed that God was proposing to everybody. Oh, by the way, 1787, Rangoon, Burma, an English sociologist went there to study the people groups, and when he found the Karen people up a mountain, he asked the Karen people, who is your God? And the Karen people in 1787 in Rangoon, Burma said, we serve a God named Yahweh, who proposed to us thousands of years ago with languages of fire from the sky. So these people look up and they see languages inside fire, and they tremble with fear, wouldn't you? First verse. Where do you see that happen again? Pentecost. Acts chapter 2 says they were all together in one accord, and they saw the whole room cover them in smoke. They heard the sound of a trumpet, and they saw languages inside fire. Here's the thing. What is Pentecost? Pentecost is a yearly celebration of that exact day. Why? Because that's your anniversary. If you're married, do you celebrate your anniversary? Yes, you do. If you don't, I'd highly recommend it, right? So God marries the Israelites on this day, and then what do? You set aside a day every year to remind you of that day. It's an anniversary celebration. The anniversary celebration is called Pentecost or the Feast of Weeks, either one. And here's what's interesting. You could read about this later in Leviticus 23 if you'd like. Pentecost is the only place in the whole Bible where you're commanded to bring an offering of bread made with yeast. Everywhere else it's unleavened bread. We don't want leaven around here. Unleavened bread, not Pentecost. Pentecost always had to be leavened bread. Always. Always. And here's what would happen. You would bring your leavened loaf of bread to a priest, and the priest would break the leavened loaf of bread, and he would flood it with oil. And he would pray a prayer like this: I thank you, my God, that your unleavened life is willing to become one with our leavened life. I thank you, my God, that your unleavened life is willing to become one with our leavened life. The idea of Pentecost is God marries leavened people right where they are. See, Pentecostals for years have said, you got to get the leaven out of your life for God to use you. You better get the leaven out of your life for God to use you. And listen, should you get the leaven out of your life? Yes, it's for your best life. But it has nothing to do with how God feels about you, and it has nothing to do with how much he loves you, and it has nothing to do with what he can do with your life. The whole point of Pentecost is that God wants to marry you, leaven and all, issues and all, just as you are right now. When the Spirit of the risen Christ gets into a normal, everyday, average person with heavy-duty issues, you can't imagine what he can do with a life like that. That is Pentecost. And what would happen is the priest would flood the leavened loaves, and he would say, I thank you, my God, that your unleavened life is willing to become one with our leavened life. Then when he was done with that, he would say, now the day of Pentecost had fully come. Acts chapter 2, when the day of Pentecost is fully come, they were all together in one accord in the room, and they saw the Spirit of God cover them in smoke. They heard the sounds of a trumpet, and they saw languages inside fire over the top of their head. So the same exact thing is happening on the same exact day, just years later. The only difference is this time they spoke back, which is the birth of the church, which was the bride of Christ. The whole thing was about a wedding. The question is how should we respond? Let me show you Leviticus 23. This is the last, there's all these interesting commands around Pentecost. Don't worry about them for right now. I want to show you the last command of Pentecost. This is Leviticus 23. Watch this. On that same day, it's talking about Pentecost, you are to proclaim a sacred assembly and do no regular work. This will be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come wherever you live. In other words, our anniversary, let's set it aside, okay? Next, this is the last command, and then it goes on to the Feast of Trumpets. This is what it says. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field, nor gather the gleanings of your harvest. Leave them for the poor and the foreigner residing amongst you, for I am the Lord your God. In other words, the last command around what Pentecost was to be generous to those who can't do anything in return for you. Essentially, when you become aware that God loved you when you didn't deserve it. See, kingdom people treat people as they are worth and not as they deserve. All right? Jesus says, look at the flowers, look at the birds. They don't do anything to deserve it. God takes care of them. When you get a real revelation that the Spirit of God has just indwelt a leavened person who didn't deserve it, but God counted you worth it, the only appropriate response is to treat others as they are worth and not as they deserve. Right? See, I hear this argued about a lot, like, is tongues the initial evidence? Is tongues the initial evidence? Is tongues the initial evidence? And listen, that's just boring. Listen, is tongues the initial evidence? Sure, initial, fine. But lasting? Pentecostals should not be known in their community simply as tongue talkers. Like, as if tongue talking is like the Pentecostal green card, right? Well, I speak in tongues, I'm Pentecostal. You know what? Tongues was the initial evidence of the infilling of the Holy Spirit, but the lasting evidence was generosity to the poor. In Acts chapter 2, they speak in tongues, but 10 verses later, what do? It says they sold as much as they could, and they helped the poor and the needy amongst them. Why? Because it's Pentecost, and that's just what Pentecostals do. When Pentecostals get a real revelation that they've been indwelt with the Spirit of the risen Christ, regardless if they deserve it, the only appropriate response is to celebrate that by taking care of somebody who can't do anything in return for you. Why? Because in Leviticus 23, that's what they had to do. So in Acts 2, even though they're now speaking in tongues, they don't go, well, we're speaking in tongues now. That's the end of everything. We're so moved by this grace. We got to go find some people to help. We got to take the love of God out there. That's what... Flip, the name of your whole church is Generosity Church. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your tzedakah. The word in Hebrew for righteousness is tzedak. The word for generous is tzedakah. Same word. 2,106 verses of scripture tie righteousness to generosity. That's more than heaven, hell, prayer, and faith combined. Tzedakah people do tzedakah. Why? Because we're Pentecostals, and that's just what we do. We celebrate the intimacy we have with God by making sure other people know they're loved. Pentecostals should not be known for their tongue talking. That is a lovely pillow talk, romantic language thing that all of us should enter into, and I hope that we all do. I hope we all pray in the Spirit. I hope we all do that. But that is not the end of your walk with God. The end of your walk with God is never-ending love to your brother and sister out there, making sure they are taken care of. Why? Because when God fills a leavened being, you should get so moved with graciousness and compassion that we can't help but share that love out there. Thank you so much for letting me be your guest this morning. I hope you enjoyed that. Grace and peace. God bless.